Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Primary Maths Podcast. I'm John Cripwell.
And I'm Becky Brown.
And this is the podcast where we talk all things primary maths.
Each week during term time, we'll bring you a relaxed but packed episode with classroom conversations, interviews with the experts, and ideas you can actually use wherever you're teaching.
We'll also be sharing a resource we think is worth your time and having a bit of a chat about the maths of life, because maths is frankly everywhere. Now, just in case you missed it, last week's episode is really one worth listening to. We featured a conversation with Dr. Heidi Kirkland that covered all things maths anxiety, and it's something that affects a surprising number of people. So if you're interested in maths anxiety, you want to learn a little bit more about it, go back and have a listen to last week's episode when you get a chance.
Today's guest brings a wealth of experience in education, and the conversation touches on curriculum, character, and unexpectedly, Eric Cantona.
Okay, before we jump into the interview, let's talk a little bit maths of life, shall we? How are you this week, Becky?
Yeah, good, thank you. A bit hot, John. The heat wave is heating up, isn't it?
Yeah, when we're recording this, it is, well, my watch says it's 25 degrees outside, but as you can see, I record in a conservatory, which during the winter is freezing cold and during the summer is unbearably hot. So if I go quiet at any point during this recording, it's probably because I passed out with some sort of heat stroke. But we shouldn't complain, should we? Because, you know, there's not a cloud in the sky, the sun's shining, and neither of us are in a classroom with 30 sweaty year 6 pupils who refuse to take off their leavers hoodies.
Absolutely, it is definitely that time of year, isn't it, John? Yeah. Very relieved to be here with lots of air coming through, but still very hot. Yeah, I think my computer's showing 27 degrees here today, so it is a hot one.
You're a little bit further south than me, so that's where those 2 degrees are coming from. So on my mind this week then, the maths of life. I was in a school at the start of the week, and we were having a look around, and this is 2 weeks in a row now where I have seen maths lessons in schools that involve time. And I was watching this year 2 maths lesson on time, and it was brilliant. All the children had got the little plastic clocks out because we were looking at analog time and thinking about, you know, what the big hand does and what the smaller hand does and what each unit of time is as it goes around the clock face in increments. But it did bring back a little bit of PTSD for me, because way back in the mists of time, appropriately, when I was on my PGCE, my first placement was in a really lovely rural school in Belper, which is a little town in Derbyshire. And I was in a year 2 class, and I was keen, as I have remained for the rest of my career, obviously. But also, you know, I got into teaching slightly later, so I was mid-20s. So I was keen, but I was also sort of confident. You know, I'd lived a little bit. And I was placed with a job share pair of teachers called Ros and Anne, and they were brilliant. They were completely polar opposites of each other. Ros was very methodical and meticulous and liked to keep the classroom absolutely just so, and Anne would come in and undo all of that with enthusiasm and flair and chaos, and it was great. But for my first thing that I ever had to do in teaching, I was given a group of 6 year 2 children to teach time to. And I remember quite distinctly Ros saying, "You've only got 6 children, you know, just teach them about time, that'll be fine." And looking back now, clearly she threw me under the bus, totally.
Absolutely. But, I mean, teaching 6 children time, I don't know. I think I'd take a class load teaching something else any day, John.
Yeah. Well, I went away and I made myself a little worksheet with clock faces on and things, and I came back full of confidence that I was going to take these children who knew nothing about how to tell the time, and by the end of my little 20-minute input, that would be it. They'd never be late for anything again in their lives. Obviously, it went horrifically wrong, and I didn't look over my shoulder, but I assume that Ros was absolutely falling about the place laughing, because it was one of those things that you don't realise what you don't know, or you don't realise what the children don't know. And some of those misconceptions come through experience, don't they? And this was my first little bit of experience. So it did get me thinking, why is time so weird? Like, why are there 60 seconds in a minute? Why are there 60 minutes in an hour? Where do the 24 hours in a day come from? Is this something you are already aware of, Becky, that you know the basis of this?
No, I have looked into before. I think with a year 5 or 6 class once we discussed what would happen if time was in base 10, and how much easier life would be, but also not for the reasons that you may be going into now. I don't know. So yeah.
Well, I mean, the French tried base 10 during the Revolution. I'm not sure which
Really?
revolution. I'm guessing just the French Revolution. But they tried base 10. They had 10-hour days and 100-minute hours, and people didn't like it. I'm guessing the 100 minutes, I don't know. I suppose each minute was 100 seconds. Feels like quite a long hour.
Yeah.
If you've got an hour of English or an hour of geography or an hour of anything other than maths, an hour seems like a long time if it's 100 minutes. Anyway, they didn't like it. They stuck with base 60. But it turns out the base 60 system can be traced back and blamed, like so many things, on the Babylonians. So the Babylonians chose base 60, apparently not to make our lives harder, but because, as we all know, 60 is a beautifully flexible number. It divides evenly by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 10, and it's perfect for breaking things apart. So that stuck around for quite a while with astronomy and geometry, and then later on timekeeping, because of course time and geometry kind of go together. When you look at a clock face and you're measuring things in degrees and angles on a clock face, you've got that whole link between time and geometry. And then you can see I've really gone into detail on this research, Becky, because I was quite determined to find out where everything came from. The Egyptians are to blame for dividing the day and night into 12 parts, giving us a 24-hour day. And then Greek and Islamic scholars refined the system further, and medieval clockmakers made it standard. So that's why when next time you're trying to teach year 2 children or year 3 children how to tell the time on an analog clock, you can blame a combination of the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, Islamic scholars, and medieval clockmakers. It's all their fault.
Love that, John. What a history of time, and all those different civilizations coming together to give us the gift that is teaching time
All
today.
those civilizations coming together to ruin my first ever teaching
Yes.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that was a tough one, John. I'm sure you've taught very many lovely and impactful time lessons since then.
I've tried. Yeah, I have tried. Another next week, maybe we'll talk about base 10. Why don't we just use base 60 for our number system now? I'm glad that we don't, but we could have done. So we'll talk about base 10 maybe next time. What's on your mind, Becky?
I've been thinking about numbers this week. Obviously, thinking about numbers this
Of
week,
course.
John. It was Friday the 13th last Friday, and I was thinking about the connotations that different numbers have for different people. Obviously, for listeners who are returning, they will have heard you asking our guest last week what their favourite number was, and I think it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because most people will have a favourite number, and I was thinking my favourite number is actually 13.
Which is unusual. Most
It is
people
unusual.
would stay away from the number 13.
Yeah, and I don't think it hasn't always been 13. I think it has evolved to become 13. My house number is 13, which again is quite unusual because there are lots of streets that don't have a number 13. And I also obviously have lots of happy memories in my house, but also my youngest was born on the 13th in the year 2013. So I feel like 13 came together then with lots of good things. But it would be just as easy to detest the number 13. I broke my ankle on Friday the 13th. So I think you can look for the good and bad, couldn't you? It's about what's important to you and what you look for in a favourite number, I guess.
Yeah, very nice.
So what's your favourite number, John?
My favourite number is 3. And I don't have a particularly strong reason for it other than when I played football, I was usually in defence because, there's quite a lot of me and people had to run around me. So that sort of last line of defence was quite useful. And I wore the number 3 for that. I also quite like 3 is a factor of other numbers and things. I don't know why. But my car radio doesn't have numbers anymore, sadly, for volume. But in the past, on previous cars, I would always want it to be on an even value or a multiple of 3. So 15 was fine, 9 was fine. It gave me a little bit more flexibility over, just how loud I wanted to have it. But 7 was out the window, and
Absolutely
13 was no good for me, I'm afraid. Do you know why 13 is considered unlucky?
Oh, do you know?
I was just doing a little bit of, I just know. No, I was doing a little bit of surreptitious Googling while you were telling me about your favourite number. And apparently it's a combination of historical, religious and cultural factors. And one of those might be that the Last Supper, there was Jesus and his 12 apostles, making Judas the 13th guest and the one who betrayed Jesus. But also apparently in Norse mythology, and I am literally reading from Google here, so apologies, I have not fact-checked this. But in Norse mythology, Loki is cited as the 13th guest who disrupted a gathering of the gods.
Okay,
so
that
there
makes
you go.
sense.
Yeah. And additionally, the number 13 can be seen as disrupting the completedness of the number 12, which is often associated with concepts like the 12 months of the year or the 12 apostles. So, I don't know, one more than 12. It's a baker's dozen, isn't it, 13? So I quite like it for that, in that, if I've done the baking, I get to eat I get to eat the extra thing that we've baked. So I can get on board with 13 from that point of view. But
yeah, you could find lots of reasons to like a number and lots of reasons not to, couldn't you? I think. I mean, interestingly, my cul-de-sac that I live on has a number 13, but it doesn't have a number 10 or a number 12. So I think they did odds and evens on opposite sides, as is traditional, and then got to 8 on one side and 13 on the other. So my next door neighbour is number 8.
Well, it's funny how strong some of these superstitions can be, because I once taught a girl in year 6 who was often just slightly out on a lot of her calculations, and it took a little bit of unpicking, but I realised when she was counting aloud, so if it was a number that she had to count on from to calculate, she missed the number 13 in her counting. She went 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16. And she just decided when she was younger she didn't like the number 13. She wasn't conscious of it anymore. It was just an automatic thing now. But that, as you can imagine, we had to do a lot of verbal reasoning and, explaining our answers and things to unpick that. So, yeah, it can have a greater impact than you would ever imagine. My guest today is a teacher, leader, writer and influential voice in education. He believes schools are amongst the best places to work and that teaching is a profound privilege. He spent decades not just working in schools, but thinking deeply about how they can be better for staff, for pupils and for the communities they serve. His own experience of school as a pupil showed him how far we've come as a profession, but also how much further we can go. That belief has shaped a career grounded in the idea that great teaching and leadership can change lives. He's the former head teacher of Huntington School in York and now works with schools as a consultant. He's also the author of a series of widely respected books that combine personal insight and practical wisdom. From This Much I Know About Great Teaching to Putting Staff First, his work explores the heart of education, curriculum, leadership, trust and professional learning. With 2 new books on the way, one focused on great primary teachers and one on great secondary teachers, he continues to shape the national conversation about what it means to teach well and lead well in today's schools. My guest today is John Tomsett, and I'm delighted to have him on the show. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much. That's a very, very, very flattering intro. Yeah, not totally deserved, maybe. I don't know, but thank you very much.
We usually like to start with talking about what maths was like, or what your experience of school was like.
I mean, I love school. I absolutely love school. And I lived on 6 School Hill. Who knew, right? So there was the primary school, and there were 6 council houses, and we were number 6 of 6 on the hill down from the school. And I just loved it. So I was mates with the head teacher's son, So Peter Britton was the head teacher, and his son, he's a classical music fanatic, and he called his son Benjamin Britten, obviously.
Very
And
nice.
so he used to play a lot with Ben, and just loved it. And I can still, I know. I mean, interestingly, we had I had six teachers in the 6 years, and they were the same six teachers all the way through. Right, so that that stability was amazing. Back in
Yeah,
those days.
that's not something you see quite as much today, I guess.
No, and
Turnover and churn in schools in
incredible.
terms of teaching. Yeah.
And in secondary, just loved secondary. Did all the sport, did all the stuff, did the show. I was the lead singer in the show in my first year, and then when it came to maths, I'm one of those people. I know you have to work at maths, but I get maths, right? I love the patterns. I think it's a beautiful subject, and so while I was brilliant, while I was studying and enjoying it brilliantly, I also wanted to be a golf professional. So I started A levels with maths, biology, chemistry. Got chucked out after a term because I was just mucking about relentlessly. And I went back 2 years later, and Ron Hunt, who was the deputy who chucked me out, let me back in. And I went and begged him on the 28th of August 1982 to let me back in. Well, I know it was night. I know that was the night before I went to see him the next day, and and I couldn't do biology or chemistry, so I'd forgotten those, the fundamentals from 2 years. But I took maths because I could do maths. Took economics because you didn't need the O level, and then was scrabbling around for a third and took English. Ended up becoming an English teacher and getting an English degree. But at heart, I'm a mathematician, bizarrely, and I just love the maths.
That's great to hear. So, you're also a fairly, I have to say, prolific writer. You've written a number of books
I've got
now.
I've got three coming out this summer. I've got these two. I've got another one that I've written for HEP. So it would be 13 then. In
13
10 years.
books.
30, I think my job now is to use my platform, whatever my platform is, to help people to pass the baton on and highlight some brilliant people who are doing brilliant stuff, who are just in the corners of the country, unheralded and unrecognised, who do brilliant things.
And it would be great to talk about a couple of those in a moment, because I know that the books that you've been working on recently are very much, as you say, sort of a study of great teachers and teachers that
It's
you
been
found to
it's
be
been so interesting,
fantastic.
John. We'll come to those, but I think it's my best work so far. So we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, before we get to that though, your blog as well, and several of your other titles, all have this sort of preface of "this much I know about." Where did that sort of
Well, that first
come
came.
from?
I was asked by York local authority to talk to some deputies in June 2012. So 12 years ago, 13 years ago now. And I just took us. I just thought I'm not going to do. I'm not prep anything. I'm just going to write down a few things I'd learned. By that time, I'd been ahead for 9 years, and I wrote down 12 bullet points. And I read the Observer, read the Guardian, and I'd also heard about this thing called a blog, right? I didn't quite know understand it. So I thought, and it went on and the 12 bullet points, and I just sat around the table with people and we just talked about what it's like to be ahead, and when the buck stops with you, blah blah blah. And I had my 12 points, went through them, we chatted away, and I thought, oh, that could make a blog, this blog thing. So I just put this blog up, and I thought, I was scrabbling around for a title. And the Observer, I'm not sure it still does, but the Observer used to do a thing called This Much I Know, as an interview with people, and they would bullet point 10 things they knew about life that they'd learned. So I just copied that, and my first blog in June 2012 says "with apologies to the Observer" on it, because that's where I nicked the title from. This Much I Know, and then my first book was called "This Much I Know About Love Over Fear." Creation and conditions for truly great teaching. And I've gone back to Crown House for these books, and these books are now going to be called "This Much I Know About Truly Great Teachers and What We Can Learn from Them." So there's a nice kind of 10 years of book writing coming back to where I started.
So you've got these two new books coming out. This much I know about great primary teachers, and this much I know about great secondary teachers. My question, I suppose, is why the two books, other than to have two more books to add to your collection? Why separate those into two books? Do you think that there is fundamentally a huge difference between being a great primary teacher and a great secondary teacher?
Part of it. So I mean, the background to the books I'll just go through very quickly the background to where the books came from.
Sure.
So back at Research Ed last September in London, and I went to listen to Raj Chandray, Dr. Raj Chandray, and Professor Rob Coe, talk about their project with the National Institute for Teaching. I think that's what it's called, the new one. And it was heralded, it was like a Moneyball for teaching, right? So the story of Moneyball, if you don't know the story of Moneyball, is the Oakland A's. They're a baseball team floundering badly. There's a film of it. And long story short, they were after the wrong metric. They were trying to find flashy people who hit the ball a long way. And the metric they really should have been after was who can get to home base quickly and most reliably. So they changed their metric for measuring it, for measuring who they signed. And they went from being bottom of the league to top of the league, right? And so what Raj and Rob are doing is trying to find a single metric based on the progress that their children make, that teachers' children make in their learning, as a measure of what constitutes a good teacher, right? So when they were talking about it, and there's 12 schools, hundreds of teachers in these 12 secondaries in this mat. Every child you teach is examined at the end of the year, and you get a progress score for you based on all your pupils' progress, blah. And they were genuinely talking about recruitment and how it'd be helpful for recruitment. So I just put my hand up and I said, yeah, I have literally interviewed thousands of people, 18 years as a head and 30 years as a senior leader. It's a bit more complex than just a single data point. And I said, like, to be honest, sometimes I can shake hands with someone and think, yeah, you can teach, you'll be great. And there's people at the end of the day where I say to them, please don't go into teaching, you'll have a terrible life. Right? And I got booed. And,
wow.
and Becky, some big fish in the room. So Becky Allen was in the room, Sam Sims was in the room. And they started booing me and laughing at me. And Rob said, okay, we will forget our research and we'll just rely on the John Tomsett infallible interview method. so we had a coffee afterwards. I said, Rob, it's a 4-year project. There must be something else you might do. And he said, what? So I went away and thought about it, wrote a couple of blogs, and by Tuesday I got the book deal, right? Because I said, what you got to do is go and watch people teach and find out about them, and then see if we can work out what it was. So I went and I interviewed my old English teacher, who's now 68, who I'm still in contact with, one of the people from way back, 40 years ago, but also went round and I visited 18 schools. And what was interesting, Crown House said, so that was that I did my first visit on the 4th of October, and Crown House said the deadline is the 6th of January for all the copy, right?
Yeah.
And on any visits on the 4th of October, I'd done no visits. So the books ended up being, each chapter is about 8,000 words. So I ended up writing about 177,000 words, right? So physically you couldn't put it into one book, right? It just didn't work.
Yeah.
So it had to be two books physically. My conclusions are the same. Right, my conclusions are exactly the same about what good teachers do, right? Which is interesting.
So if we read the last chapter of each book and your conclusion,
they come to the same conclusions, but with different illustrations. So the primary one reflects back on the primary teachers I saw, the secondary reflects back on the secondary ones. But also, what was great was that Rob wrote the intro, right? So Rob Coe, I'm not interested in this binary stuff in education, right? So I've done loads of work with Rob for years, but I wasn't going to have a row with him. So he wrote a lovely intro about how damned hard it is to judge the quality of teachers, and I asked Alex Quigley, our colleague and friend of mine, what research there was about teacher behaviours and attitudes that lead to good student progress. So he put me in touch with a meta-analysis that Barrett Rosenshine did with Barbara First in 1971. So I analyse that. I take that and introduce that to the readership, and look at my teachers through that lens. So that's 54 years ago. Rosenshine identified 11 behaviours and attitudes that were worth further research, and I came up with 10. I've got my 10, and I can tell you about what the 10 are. So I came to the conclusion, really, that if Rob wants a single data point for progress, and I've got these 10 behaviours and attitudes, they're just two sides of the same coin, right? So every teacher I interviewed and feature in the books, their pupils' progress is phenomenal. So if you've got, one drama teacher, GCSE drama teacher, her P8 scores plus 2.8. That's nearly 3 grades over years. Right? That's nearly 3 grades higher than predicted based on Key Stage 2 results. And she does everything you'd want her to do as a teacher. So if you're doing these things, you'll get great results. If you've got great results, you're probably doing these things. And that's the conclusion we came to. But it's been fascinating.
How did you find these fantastic teachers? I mean, I'm sure there's head teachers across the country who would love to know where do you find these incredible teachers that you did your interviews with?
When someone asked, what do you mean by a truly great teacher? And I said, no, nothing special, right? It's just people who. I think the best measure is the teachers. If you've got a visitor, the teachers who you'd go and visit with that visitor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Who you know, right? Because I think the best measure of a school is what's going on when no one's looking, right? So if you just turn up with a visitor, you know good things will be happening.
So is it about, it's one of those things about consistency then, just knowing that it's consistently, of a standard.
Just day in, day out. I spoke to David Carter once, and he said, and I use the quote sometimes, people think to be an outstanding teacher, you've got to teach rock and roll lessons, blah, blah, blah. No, you just teach good lessons that follow on from the previous lesson, which are challenging, pitched high, have a low floor, inclusive, and that's day in, day out, 5 lessons a day, 5 hours a day. That's outstanding.
I know you wrote in one of your blogs, there was a pupil called Harry, I think, that you spoke to, who said that he particularly enjoyed challenging lessons, even though he may not have been always successful in those lessons, but one of the things that he felt was important as a pupil.
You had to think about it. Because you had to.
Yeah, think. Can you just tell me a little bit more about
so
Harry
we
as a pupil and how that came about?
Yeah, Mary and I were interviewing for our SCND book, our SCND book, Mary, Maya and I. And we're interviewing Harry, right, and his mum. He was then in April of year 6, but in December of year 5, he ADHD, ASD. His teacher in year 5 was so overwhelmed by him, didn't know what to do, that she got him at the back of the class, facing the wrong way out of the window, on his own, all day with worksheets while she taught the other 29. And at that point, Mum took him out and put him in this new school. And what was great was that was in the April. We interviewed him in April of year 6, and in the June he got expected progress in his SATs across the board, right? Amazing. And so we were talking to him, and we did these interviews on Zoom, and it's a wild interview. There was a dog involved, Mum was there, Harry was in and out of stuff, getting books. Oh, I'll show you this book, show you that book. And at one point he said, I really like science because it's hard. And Mary said, oh, Harry, I've just heard you say something now. Tell me a bit more about that. And he said, well, the thing is, when it's easy, you don't have to think, you can just do it. But when it's hard, you have to think and it stays in your head. And it was like Daniel Willingham had prompted him to say it, right? Because it was just liked hard stuff. And Mary and I found that across the board, right? Children don't like easy stuff. I think Dylan Williams has said something about how there's a kind of roughly 50% of stuff you teach because they already know or something. Some figure. So making sure you understand what they know already, and then really pitching it high, but giving them all the scaffolds they need to understand it is the trick.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, isn't it? It's the scaffolds to allow them to reach that next level of understanding or knowledge or whatever. That's the skill for me. I
Yeah.
think in one of the skills, maybe you would say one of the 10, I don't know. But of great teaching is what do I need to do to enable? I know where I want them to go. I know where I want the class to go. I know what the next small step is. And particularly in maths teaching, we think a lot about breaking the journey down into small steps and thinking really coherently about how you might take that next step. So then that might be provided for you in a scheme of work or in a curriculum or something like that. But for me, then the skill of the teacher is identifying, okay, this is the next step that this class needs to take, knowing the 30 children in the class, what are the scaffolds that need to be put in place so that each of those can take that next step. And for those who might already be on that journey or already there, how can we go a little deeper into that without overextending them? Would you agree with that as a sort
Yeah,
of
yeah.
summary?
Yeah, and I think so. So the best maths teacher I've ever seen, right, ever seen, was recommended to Mary and I by Mark McCourt. A guy's called Chris McGrain up in Scotland, and we interviewed him for our first her curriculum book. And so when I was thinking about a truly great teacher, I went, for this latest book, he has a chapter, quite a length, quite probably the longest chapter, and so he teaches in Holyrood School up in South Glasgow, 2,200 kids, biggest school in Scotland. And he's just phenomenal. He breaks all the rules. He's absolutely phenomenal. And he's teaching equivalent of year 12, so lower sixth A level. I didn't even understand his starter. I could make head nor tail in what you're supposed to do. And then when he explained it, it was clear as day. And he's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And so one of the things he does, which breaks all the rules, he said at the end of the starter, he said, okay, hands up if you got that right. And I'm going, oh God, that's a schoolboy error. Right? And then I talked to him about it afterwards, and I said, I've sat there watching you, and the reason you can ask that, and half the class put their hand up or three quarters put their hand up, was because you know exactly who's got it right and who's got it wrong, and you're just doing a global check, right? Because you know exactly, all 30 children, big class, 30 children, every child and where they are. And then he said, that's because I teach between the desks. He's never still. He's up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, round the room, and he's over people's shoulders, right? So he knows who can do it and who can't, and what he needs to do to get them where they need to get to. Every single child. It's
It's
amazing.
that sort of instant feedback. We talk
All
about that a
time.
lot, don't we, as being a key to great teaching as well.
And even
And
like it was amazing. So it was period one, and I'm sitting at the back, and there's a lad to my right eating a bagel, and I'm going bloody hell! What?
did he offer you some?
I was kind of boiling over. Oh my God! Yes. And then Chris said, "What's in your bagel?" He said, "Oh, it's cream cheese." He said, "That's a bit boring." And just carried on with the lesson. So I said, Chris, tell me about it. He said, but I don't sweat the small stuff. I don't sweat the small stuff, right? If he couldn't differentiate 32x squared, I'd be upset, right? But I'm not worried that he's eating a bagel, right?
But I guess that comes back to knowing that pupil again, doesn't it, as well? So that must be another part of this puzzle, I guess, is those relationships. And
Tom Bett and I, we'll fall out about this stuff, right? But it's every single person said, if you haven't got that positive working relationship with these children, you're stuffed. You can't even begin. And what I saw in every classroom, in these 18 classrooms plus my old teacher, was everybody enjoying it. right? Everybody wanted to be there. There were full classes and people were enjoying the stuff. They were having, dirty word, they were having fun. Who knew, right? They were really enjoying it because it was
But
hard.
was that,
No,
I was going to say, was that because it was designed to be a fun lesson? You
no,
know,
no, not at all. Not at
I
all.
remember back in the early days of my teaching, we would have, you know, fun maths Fridays and things
No,
like
no,
that, where
no, no,
it would be you're all singing, you're all dancing
no.
lesson sort of thing.
They were loving it because it was hard and they were learning loads, right?
Yeah.
And they don't like fun lessons, as in this is easy and rubbish and I'm just going to waste an hour because I've not really prepped anything. We'll just have a bit of fun. We'll do whatever. And another massive learning point for me, and I didn't realize it until I spoke to the children because I interview children every time, was they mimic you completely, right? So my 10th, I had nine behaviors and attitudes. My 10th is work hard. Be clearly working hard for them, and then they'll do anything for you, and they'll work hard in return. And if you're not, and they know who swings the lead, right? They know lead swingers. They know people who aren't really pulling their weight in the classroom. They absolutely get that. So that's my 10th, is just put a shift
So
in.
we'll just come back to this fun thing for a moment because
Yeah.
it's something topical in conversations I'm hearing at the moment. Because I'll just set the scene for you. I don't know if you know or not, but over the last 10 years, and particularly in primary maths, there's been a huge shift towards this idea of teaching for mastery, of which I'm a proponent. I think fundamentally you would probably it's teaching for mastery, but it's good teaching is what it is. You know, it's all those things that we've already talked about in terms of making sure the scaffolds are in place, making sure you know where you're going, all of those sorts of things. Sometimes it gets confused with other things, and you know it's got to be a certain way. But if you broke it down to its principles, it's good teaching. But some of the pushback that I hear from teachers occasionally at the moment is about, you know, it's become a bit dry. We've lost some autonomy because I think teaching for mastery has become conflated with following a scheme of work. And so my argument around that is we're using the schemes of work incorrectly, perhaps in some cases. I would argue that the benefit of a scheme of work is that some of the thinking long term is done for you. So we know where we're going. There's a clear path. Some of, in maths particularly, some of the hooks or the intelligent practice or the way that we're representing a problem, some of that thinking has been done for you. But then your skill as a teacher, as we mentioned earlier, is adapting that for your class. For me, a lot of that needs to be practical. You know, if we're thinking primary maths, I want to be, if it's a lesson about measurement, I want to be measuring things, you know, not just reading about measuring things, we actually experience those things. So I guess my question is, what makes a lesson fun? And I suppose we've already discussed this a little bit, but what makes a lesson fun, and why is it not Fun Maths Fridays?
Okay, so one of the primary teachers I feature is a bloke called Josh down at Old Fletton. Great interview. So he used to play left back for Swansea, and when they got promoted to Premiership, the manager wanted to go to a five across the back, and he said, "You're not quick enough to be a wing back, and you're not tall enough to be a centre half. So sorry, you're off." And so he became a teacher because he used to do football coaching in the summer, blah blah blah, and he's unbelievably thoughtful about his practice. So there was a year six lesson on ratio where he's got 30 children in the class, and he knows exactly what each one can do. So 10 of them started on the independent tasks from the beginning and just worked on their own. 10 along the back were kind of backwards fading. Some completed slightly easier, but would get onto the independent. Then he taught the 10 who hadn't quite got it from the previous lesson. And that 10 became 2 with about 10 minutes of the lesson to go. and every single child got onto an independent task by the end of the lesson, right? And they just got on, right? It was beautiful teaching, and he's around the room checking in. But when they come into the room, he's having a chat with one of them about Peterborough Football Club and what the results were last night. He's having a chat with another one who'd done some gymnastics, and she'd been away for the weekend. So the relationship is just so healthy and so strong, interested in them as individuals. He's unbelievably enthusiastic, and when they get something right, when there's a misconception that's been corrected, and the children have been disabused of that misconception, he's going, yes, that's great. He's visibly enjoying working hard and their success. So everybody's enjoying it. That's what I mean by they're having fun, right? Not, just some silly game stuff that they don't remember. It was so brilliant.
So a feeling of accomplishment, of success.
Completely.
Yeah.
So I've got to know the government's advisor on mental health, Sir Simon Wesley. So one of my books back in 2017 was about mental health in schools. And I interviewed him for Haringey a couple of years ago, 18 months ago. And we were talking about, because I think success is the key thing, right? It's making every child feel successful. And I don't believe in all this nonsense about be the best you can be. You can be whatever you want to be. No, you can't actually, right? What we can do is breed success through success, right? The more successful children are, the better, the more successful they're likely to be. And the only way to make children successful academically is to be really good teachers, right? So that's what we've got to work on. And so Simon Wesley was interesting, and he said that his old tutor wrote a book, and he's the grand fromage of all mental health, right? So he makes decisions about lockdowns, blah blah blah. He's professor at King's, Regis Professor of Psychiatry at King's, and he was saying that his old tutor wrote a book called The Effect of a longitudinal study on the effect of secondary schools on children over their lifetime. And this study took the children had the worst upbringings and the worst backgrounds, most terrible life, and looked at them 40 years on and what happened to their lives. And of that cohort in this study, the ones who were successful of that cohort, who had a terrible time, they were at least good at something at school. If you were good at nothing at school, then you had a terrible life as well. Even if it was just being good looking, right? Even if you were just the best looking lad in the year group, that was enough. And I look back now and I think I wish I would emphasize more as a head success, because I just got on. I just like, Dowley, come on, let's get on. And actually taking a bit of time to celebrate children's success. Any success is better than nothing, right? It doesn't matter, right? And that's where the secret of all this is. Because if you feel like going somewhere 5 hours a day to be rubbish and never succeed at it, why would you turn up? By the time you get to year 10, you're done.
As a head teacher, you would want your staff, I would imagine, to have high expectations of the pupils. We start with high expectations, correct? Or not?
I think that's possibly the most important thing, right? But what it is, what that is in practice, and what people's sense of what high expectations are interesting. So I always quote my old head of maths, who went on to become my deputy, who's now head at Huntington, Matt Smith. And he went to see, he was inquiring with one of his colleagues in the maths department about a girl in set 4. And he says, how's Julie getting on? And the teacher said, well, she's doing okay for a set 4. What does that mean? What the baked in low expectations in that comment? She's doing okay for a set 4. Bloody hell. So I expect less of a set 4 than I do of a set 1. That's terrible. Right. So I've never met a head teacher or a teacher who says I've got low to middling expectations of my children. Right? And then you go around the classroom and they're given 5 hours of low level administrative work to do. right? It's just dull as ditch water, and no one's having any enjoyment at all. And I think, and I think some of it's down to curriculum.
When we're recording this, there's a curriculum review going on, and potentially, hopefully, somebody will make some correct decisions about what needs to go where in terms of the primary curriculum. So you mentioned, you teased earlier these 10 principles of great teaching.
I'll tell you. So number one is teach with enthusiasm. I know that sounds obvious. If you're dulled by what you're teaching, what chance the kids, right? Second one is explain things with clarity, right? Just be really clear, whatever it takes to be clear about your explanations. Vary your pedagogic practice. Don't just do this, the same thing every time, another PowerPoint, be organised and purposeful. Children don't like people have to rush out and do 3 more copies of a worksheet or something. So those 4 are the same as Barak Rosenshine back in 1971, right? His first one was clarity, my first one's enthusiasm. And then number 5 is and these are in no particular order, have genuinely high expectations. Number 6 is relentlessly check for understanding. Number 7 is have a confident understanding of the content yourself. So that might take a lot of work, especially at primary. I get that. Number 8 is, going back to Chris McGrain, help individual pupils around the room. Number 9 is build those positive working relationships. And number 10 is work hard. So there are my controversial 10.
I haven't spotted anything controversial in there. I've been nodding away with all 10 of those when you've mentioned them. As you were going through those there and I was nodding away, my thoughts turned a little bit when you mentioned those first 4. Just recap those again. So it was enthusiasm, clarity.
Teach with enthusiasm, explain things with clarity, vary your pedagogic practice, be organised and purposeful.
Well, certainly 3 of those. I was just thinking from a subject leadership point of view. I think those are just great qualities to have, whatever you're doing. Would you agree? If you're thinking what makes a great leader in schools, being enthusiastic, having clarity has always been my go-to. How do we get buy-in to something in a school amongst staff and things? Having clarity of purpose and why we're doing what we're doing, I think is really important. And being organised is the thing that I'm continuing to work on even now. But it was probably my downfall as a teacher. I always tried to be organised, but it was definitely the area I had to work on most. But I think they're great qualities in a person, full stop, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think if you get all those frameworks right, then you can make it entertaining as well. You know what I mean? It's a bit like I write sonnets and stuff, and people say, oh, it's dreadfully hard to write within a very strict 14 lines form, but actually it makes you think harder and frees you up, right? Because you've got some certainty about some stuff. And then you can be creative within that certainty. And I think it's when you don't have that certainty about stuff and that consistency about stuff, you fray, and you're coping at the margins of stuff, and you can't. I think get some stuff that's absolutely nailed, and then you can be free inside that.
That's really interesting, because that feeds into a conversation that I've heard. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but this idea of teachers losing autonomy in the classroom, that they are being forced to teach in a particular way, forced to do things in a certain way. And we hear a lot about this word fidelity to an approach, fidelity to a scheme and things. What would you say to a leader who says, well, we want there to be a consistent approach for the pupils. We want the pupils to know what a maths lesson looks like at 6 schools, street school, whatever.
Yeah.
We want there to be consistency so that lessons build, and so that a frame of reference that they had in year 3 is the same reference that they have in year 4, and that's why we want this consistent approach. And at the same time, you've got teachers in that school saying, "We're bored. The children are bored. We feel constrained."
So I think about this all the time because I do lots of work with Tom Sherrington with the walkthroughs, and Tom and I go into schools and consult and watch teachers. So if you're using, let's say you're checking for understanding and you're using mini whiteboards, right? And you're using show me boards. You want some really consistent, accurate use of those with real fidelity to the process. Otherwise, you just get cheating, right? Right. The whole point of using the show me boards is to get an in the moment view of all 30 children in the class, right? So, if they put the, and so if down one row of children, one of them's got the answer and the other 5 have copied, then functionally that's a waste of time, right? So actually get them to hide what they're writing, turn it over, right? 3, 2, 1, show, hold them there. Okay, I can scan that now. I've got 3 different answers. I don't know which is the right answer. You've got 2 9s, you've got 9 20ths, you've got 7 8s. Oh, blimey, they all look the same to me. Which one's right? That's what you want. So you only get, and you can make that really fun. Right, I've got 3 different answers. I'm really confused. You tell me how you got your answer. How did you get your answer? Blimey, they still sound great to me. Blimey, right? So I'm not lost any of my character and the fun and the enthusiasm, but I'm really strict with how they use their whiteboards because I can't work otherwise. I don't know. The data information I've got in front of me is completely corrupted if I let them cheat, right? So actually having really strict pedagogical practice, technical practice, frees you up to be that great teacher.
So I think you've hit on something there, which is one of your first principle, which is enthusiasm, is so important, isn't it? Whatever you are doing. So I was maths lead for 15 years, and the last 5 or 6 of those, I developed a framework at my school, which was a medium-sized 2-form entry primary, where there was a framework for the lesson. So it was, we're going to start the lesson with a recap, with revisiting some prior knowledge, reactivating prior learning. There's going to be a hook, some sort of problem that we're going to investigate together. Then there's going to be an opportunity for you to have a go, at which point the teacher is going to be doing what we talked about earlier, which is moving around the classroom, having a look, having those conversations, all those sorts of things. And then some independent practice for those who are there, ready for it. If the teacher needs to pull some children together, then that's an opportunity for that as well, if we need to do some more one-to-one work. But we stuck very closely to that for the sort of the first 12 months to see how it went, and then we sort of said, this is the framework, but how you then deliver the lesson for your class, and again, it's going to look very different in a year 1 class than it is in a year 6 class, for instance. But how you do that is down to you and your personality and your character and your enthusiasm. So for me, there's a difference between, and I think this is what you're sort of alluding to, is you can still take something that has a framework which helps for that consistency, but you can add your own personality to it, your own character within it.
Entirely. And you've still got to bring to it what makes you that interesting person that they want to listen to, right? Yeah, and you have to do that. Otherwise, it's miserable for everybody. Right? So Gandhi says, what you think, what you say, and what you do, when they're aligned, that's happiness. When what you think and what you say and what you do. And I was in work 10, 11, 12 hours a day, every day, certainly as a head. I didn't want to be anybody else than me, right? Just really enjoy it. Right? Yeah, you're the head teacher. There's a few things you can't do. But you can still enjoy being amongst people and enjoy the job. Right? I was in a round peg in a round hole for 33 years, but that's because I created the culture where that could happen. Right? And it was great fun. There was some halcyon day. I was 2 or 3 moments in my career. You think, God, this is just absolutely brilliant, because you're getting paid for doing this. I can't believe I'm getting paid for doing this. It's such fun, right? So I think that's what we have to get back to and relax about, because we're not. It's not as though standards are improving with what we're doing. Right? I don't think they are, right? Generally, and we have to think about. So there's a brilliant article by Michael Young, interview with Michael Young in 2022 in the TES. Now, Michael Young wrote the book Future Schools. He's at heart. It was social justice through a knowledge-rich curriculum, 2014. Him and Dylan Williams, principal curriculum design in 2013, are the architects, are the thinking behind the knowledge-rich drive, right? That clear as day. 2022, he's interviewed. So Michael Young's interviewed in the TES, and he says, what's gone wrong with the knowledge-rich curriculum is we've forgotten how to cajole children into wanting to learn this stuff. Right? We've just asked the question: have they got the knowledge? Not how do they get the knowledge? How do they acquire the knowledge? Because you don't do that by just telling them, you acquire knowledge by asking good questions and getting children to think hard. The best example I've got, I'll just finish with this, John, was when I go into primary schools, I meet the children, I say, just bring me your favourite book from your favourite subject. So lad comes along, he's got this beautiful A3 stuck in knowledge organiser about ancient Egypt. I said, so how long ago was that then? He said, well, they were around 2650 BCE. I said, but how long goes that? He said, I don't know. I said, so it's Christmas now. How old are you? He said, well, I'm 8. He said, well, do you remember last Christmas? What did you get for last Christmas? And he told me what he got. I said, think about that. That's a year. And that was a long time ago. He goes, yeah, blimey. I said, well, you've been around for 8 of those. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to the year 0. That's 2023 of those years. And the brains are starting to spill out of his ears. I said, add another 2,650 to that. That's how many years it is. How many days is that? He said, I don't know. I said, Colin, let's find out. I did the maths. It was 1,750,000 days, right? Since the ancient Egyptians were around. And his mind was blown. But he never thought about that. He just stuck the bloody thing in the book.
Yeah, he got the facts, but not the context and certainly not the understanding.
He didn't understand it.
Yeah, and we talk about this with maths quite a lot as well in terms of times tables are a great example. So knowing your times tables is really important. I think everybody would agree with that. I didn't know mine at school. It really held me back. I wish I had put a bit more effort into learning them. I learned them as an adult, but not as a child. However, knowing that 6 times 5 is 30 will only take you so far without the understanding of why 6 times 5 is 30. And so knowledge is really important, as you say, but that understanding is the critical aspect, isn't it? So, knowing when the ancient Egyptians were is one thing, but having an understanding of how long ago that is a completely different thing.
And I think that's what held me back at maths, and I didn't go on to do maths at A level at university, was that conceptually I didn't quite understand it. I could hoop jump to get a grade A. I got grade A level maths. I could hoop jump to get a grade A level maths, but I didn't quite understand it. So,
only takes you so far.
Yeah, and I think now that's why I'm not a very good teacher of it, because I can't see the misconceptions. I can't anticipate the misconceptions. I saw Matt, my deputy, who's now the head, teach year 11 class 2019, April 2019, a few weeks before their exams. And it was a nurture class, year 11, just a small group of children. And he put up 3t subtract t equals. And I'm rocking in the corner thinking, if they can't do that now, we've got no chance. So 3t subtract t is 3, isn't it? Right? If you look at it physically, take the t away from 3t.
Take the t off, yeah.
Take the t off, you're left with 3. And he knew when he asked the child, he knew she would say that.
Yeah.
And I had no idea she could possibly say that. And he knew what to do to disabuse her of it. It was just beautiful teaching, right? So I think lots of preparation for lessons now should revolve around what they're going to say. when I ask them these questions, and what am I going to do in response?
Anticipation, and I suppose part of that is experience, isn't it? Difficult as an ECT perhaps to do all of those
So
things,
I
but
think the best thing that subject leads can do, primary and secondary, is match experienced teachers with inexperienced teachers, right? Because the inexperienced teachers won't see the misconceptions, but the experienced teachers will have seen them all. I did a lovely bit with some primary staff a few weeks ago. I said, okay, a quarter plus a fifth. What are all the misconceptions that could come up? And I got 2 9ths and 9/20ths, right? So
yeah,
I get those
yeah,
two, but they come up with a load more. It was just brilliant, right? And
yeah.
stuff I'd not thought children might do. Um, and so we had about 9 different possible answers or 10 different possible answers through different misconceptions. And that's really good planning, right? Because then
And that's one of the wonderful things about being a teacher as well, isn't it? Is that even after 20 years, you still find another misconception
oh,
because
always
children are
makes more
so
fun.
imaginative
Yeah,
and come up with
yeah,
brilliant ones.
yeah.
Thank you so much, John. Honestly, I could chat to you all day
It's good
about this sort
fun,
of stuff,
great
and
fun.
maybe at some point we'll do it again. I've got just 4 quick
Go
questions
on.
that we
Yep.
ask at the end, which I'm sure you'll have some great answers to. So, first one, and you can't say your own. What's one book or blog or resource that you would always recommend to a teacher to have a read of?
Um, I think Graham Nuttall's The Hidden Lives of Learners is the book that changed my career, changed my life. When I read that, blimey, that's a great book. And it's a great book because he wired up primary school classrooms for 6 weeks at a time, all the way. So he would follow all the way through the whole scheme of work. And he and his team could predict within 85% accuracy whether children would be successful in the test at the end or not, whether they've learnt the stuff. And it came down to them having learnt it in 3 different contexts, 3 different times. So even if they're in the room, right, that didn't count. They had to have been paying attention because he could hear what was going on in the whispers between the kids, and whether they're actually paying attention or not. So honestly, that's just a brilliant book.
I haven't read it, but I'll add it to my list. Thank you very
There's
much.
two good blogs for it because it's a 20 quid. But if you read Tom and Alex's blogs on it, it's enough.
I will have a look.
And there's lots of
Thank you
other
very
stuff
much.
around it. But Hidden Lives of Learners, it transformed my teaching. In the end, some of my kids knew more about Nuttall in my economics A-level classes than they knew about economics.
As long as they're
Three, yeah,
learning
it's three
something, John.
times, sir. Yeah, it's 3 times we've got to learn it.
What's one thing that you've changed your mind about in education during your time? I'm sure there's plenty, but
Yeah, I think it's that I think it's that fun thing and about what makes a lesson interesting. And I think when I look back now, I was a bit kind of I don't believe in the kind of binary stuff, the binary arguments. I think you need both. I'm neither a trad or a progressive, right? I take the best of it all, and I think I think it's really important to be open to moving your position on stuff. I remember Alex, having Alex as Alex Quigley as our head of research and my deputy. I couldn't do anything without an evidence base behind it. Right? And you just realise so much. It's a brilliant line by Deming, the industrialist, who said that 95% of change is just change, and only 5% of it is improvement. And so yeah, so seeing not changing very much, but doing 1 or 2 things really well, rather than doing 1,000 things and looking busy.
okay. Thank you. One, you've probably answered this a dozen times, I have to say, but if you could say one small thing that makes a big difference in the classroom? What's one small thing that you wish you could see in every classroom that would make a big difference to the children in that classroom or the students in that classroom?
Okay. Don't say, have you learnt that? Say, what have you learnt? None of this.
Yeah. So that metacognition side of things, actually thinking about.
Just ask 5 children, your bellwether children, what have you learnt in the last 10 minutes? What have you learnt? What have you learnt? What have you learnt? Not, or what have you understood? What have you understood? What have you understood? Not, have you understood that? Everybody got that? Yeah, okay, can we carry on?
Yeah.
Unless
Great
you're
stuff.
unless you're Chris McGrain, right? You're the only person allowed to do that because you're such a good athlete.
But he already knew anyway.
He already
So
knew anyway.
yeah. Yeah. And last question. This is a nice, fun one. What's your favourite number, John? And why?
Favorite number?
Yeah, it could be anything. Could have significance, or it could just be, number
Number
3 because you played left back.
number. I played number 7.
Number 7, footballing connotations, or yeah,
I for my sins, I have a small share of 2 season tickets at Old Trafford. So
right,
Robson, Beckham.
yeah.
The current number 7, I have no time for. Mason Mount. Bloody hell. How did that
I
happen?
couldn't even have
How did
told you
that
who was the
happen?
current number 7, and that's sad, isn't it? Because
How did that
I do
happen?
love my football, but and I could tell you lots of,
Mount.
not that I'm a United fan, but I could have told you lots of famous number 7s, but I couldn't tell you who the current one is.
I'm the only
So
person on the planet. So I had a photo from the Observer of Cantona's goal against Liverpool, 96 FA Cup final, and it was in an envelope. I copied it 14 times, made 14 prints of it, and it was an envelope from the Guardian. So I went down to the Cliff training ground in the summer of '96. Said to the bloke, "I'm here for Mr. Cantona to sign these. I'm from the Guardian." Just walked straight in. Eric signed. I said, "Hello, Gary Neville." Cantona signs them all. I walk out. I'm in a bit of a daze behind the barriers again, and this young lad comes along with a baseball cap signing. I said, "No, it's okay, mate. I'm fine. I've sorted." David Beckham, right? So I'm the only person on the planet to refuse David Beckham's autograph. Then the next week, when he scores from the halfway line, I'm 8 rows back in the upper weight stand, and he turns around and he does that. He's kind of almost looking at me, going, "Could have had my signature." He didn't get it. Yeah, only
very
person. I
nice,
think I'm the only person on the planet who's refused David Beckham's autograph. That's a true
very
story.
nice. Well, thank you so much for your time this morning, John. I really
Great to meet
appreciate
you,
it.
John.
I know that the listeners will have taken a lot from it as well, and I hope we get to talk again one day.
Sure, that'd be great. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Thanks, John. Thank you once again to John for joining us on the podcast this week. He was a great guest.
Yeah, lots of fabulous things to say. Really easy listen, wasn't it? Loads of things there that I related to. And yeah, his enthusiasm really shone through in the interview, John. It was a really good one.
Yeah, he's obviously still very passionate about great teaching and about children's experiences of school. And it was just great to talk to him. We talked for about an hour and 20 minutes, actually, in the end. So I did manage to trim a few little bits of probably mostly my anecdotes, actually, out of the interview. But yeah, thank you again, John. It was really good. So what were your key takeaways from the interview, Becky?
John, I think regardless of how long you've been teaching for and how long you've been in the classroom or how long you've been out of the classroom, I think it was really clear from what John was saying that it all comes down to those relationships, doesn't it? And building up those positive relationships with the children you're teaching. And I was just reflecting, really. So I am in class just 1 day a week now, and it's actually a really tricky thing to do if you're not a full class teacher, you're not seeing the children as much maybe, but it just brought back how important it is to build up those relationships.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And following on from Heidi's interview last week as well about maths anxiety, those relationships are really important in that respect as well, aren't they? From making sure that the environment feels safe and that people feel secure and able to take risks and things. And so, yeah, I think that's a great first key takeaway, is making sure that you're taking the time wherever possible to really get to know the children in your class, and making sure they get to know you a little bit as well. I think that's probably
That
the key.
Yeah, that leads really nicely onto my second one, actually, John, because it was thinking about how in a world of lots of frameworks, and frameworks was mentioned a lot, wasn't it? And how they can be really quite rigid in some circumstances. The importance of showing that teacher personality, and that's okay. You know, everyone can be going from the same framework, but you wouldn't necessarily see the same lesson taught by different teachers. And I think as a parent, that's what I would like for my children in their learning. You know, a computer could impart the knowledge, couldn't it? But I think, you know, having that bit of yourself and sharing that with the children, I think is a really important part of that balance between that rigid framework and being human, really.
Well, did you have a favourite teacher at school, Becky?
I did have a favourite teacher at school.
And were they your favourite teacher because they were big advocates of Vygotsky's, you know, zones of proximal development, or because they taught the perfect 3-part lesson?
My favourite teacher, funnily enough, was not a maths teacher. It was an English teacher. And I mean, I don't think I could probably even share some of the things we shared when we were in our GCSE class. We just had a lot of fun, but it wasn't because, and this sort of goes back to what John was saying, it wasn't because she was singing and dancing at the front. It was just because she brought this enthusiasm, and she wanted to be there with us. She wanted to be with us, and she wanted to be teaching, and it really came across.
My favourite secondary school teacher was the drama teacher, actually, Mrs. Bucknell, who I'm still in touch with today on Facebook and things. And actually, her grandchildren came to a school that I taught at, so that's how we connected again years later. But she was just brilliant because she took the time. She took the time, even though she was incredibly busy. I knew that if I needed anything, I could go to her. And actually, this is funny, when GCSE results day came around, we were actually on holiday. Bless my mum for booking. You know, clearly the family holiday was slightly more important than her eldest son's GCSE results. So this was back in the day when you had to go into school to collect them, and school was closed for the rest of the summer. So how was I going to get these results? And my mum, bless her, managed to find Mrs. Bucknell's phone number in the directory. I mean,
Can you remember that? Being able to look at your teacher's number
yeah, exactly.
up in the
Yeah,
directory?
I mean, I don't think I would be brave enough to have my number in the, not because of the kids, because of the parents probably these days.
Yeah.
But she found her number and called her up and explained the situation. And Mrs. B, bless her, she found my GCSE results, and I was able to find out, you know, how I'd done. So that kind of going above and beyond, and I know every teacher goes above and beyond, don't they? But I think you're right. Sometimes you can get caught up in the admin and the frameworks, and have you done this part of the lesson? Have you done that part of the lesson? And some of those things are really important and can definitely help. But fundamentally, the basis of everything is building great relationships.
Yeah, and coming on to something else that I was noticing from John, actually, seamlessly there, John, thank you. Thinking about the things that make a really great teacher are not necessarily the things that come in a list on a piece of paper that someone can tick when they come to watch one lesson, are they? They're just things that are ingrained in you, and some of them you do improve with experience and different situations. But I think for new teachers, I mean, it was a long time ago for me, John, but you know, you have a set of standards, and you have to make sure you're ticking on the boxes, and you've got a big folder of all the evidence of you doing this. But the actual greatness of being a teacher is far beyond that, isn't it? And I think it's probably quite difficult for some new teachers to try to align with that framework, plus also aligning with maybe why they started teaching in the first place, and then maybe a slightly separate framework which comes from SLT, possibly.
Yeah, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot recently while I've been working with schools, because this is something I've changed my mind about in education. I was, when I was a maths leader, quite the proponent of having a consistent lesson design across the school, you know, starting with revisits and recaps and things to make sure that we were reactivating that prior knowledge in maths. It's really important. Totally stand by that. and then we'd start with a problem, and then we'd have guided practice, and we'd have independent practice. And all of those things, all of those elements, I think are really important. I genuinely think that they're part of a good maths lesson. However, where I think there is room to allow teachers autonomy is how that lesson is structured and designed, so that, you know, we should be able to point to, this is where the recap took place, this is where I'd planned for the revisit of the prior learning. But it might look different in year 2 than it does in year 5. And, you know, one teacher might have done it slightly differently to another teacher. And to me, that's absolutely fine. And definitely something to be aware of when you're thinking about your staff and the other teachers that you're working with, is allowing some of their personality, in most cases, to come through and to be seen in the lessons. And that's why I think maybe lesson planning prompts might be slightly more useful than a strict lesson plan framework, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I think all those other things that you learn from watching brilliant teachers, I think that's really important, and being given the opportunity to watch them and taking that opportunity really shape those really great teachers.
Yeah, and I think John touched on that as well, didn't he, when he talked about fun maths lessons not being fun necessarily because we're doing, you know, Fun Maths Friday or something like that, where we're just doing something completely different. But it's making sure that the pitch is right, that the children are engaged, that there's, you know, a problem to be solved and a purpose to the learning. And if you can get all of those elements in there, you will engage most of the children most of the time, which is, you know, the minimum that we're looking for, I guess.
Each week we're going to share with you a relevant resource that we think will support you in your teaching and learning in maths, hopefully as much as possible linked to the interview for today. And John has got a great Teach Meet coming up that he's going to tell us about this week.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this before Tuesday the 24th of June, which you won't be doing because we put this out on Tuesday the 24th of June, for crying out loud. Right. Yeah, absolutely. So this episode will be released on Tuesday, the 24th of June. Now, if you happen to be an early bird and listening to this in the morning, tonight you'll be able to join us for a Teach Meet, a Twinkle Teach Meet, which is has the title Exploring How to Implement Oracy Across English, Maths and Science. And I will be delivering the maths portion of that. And then we've got some fantastic colleagues from Twinkle that will be attending to the English and Science parts. So if you would like to come along to that, it is entirely free. If you are listening to this after the 24th of June, which most people will be doing, don't worry, you haven't missed out. You can go to Twinkle Teach Meets, just Google Twinkle Teach Meets, or I'll put a link in the show notes. And there are literally hundreds of free Teach Meets that you can access on topics across the whole range of teaching. From a maths point of view, we've got things on fluency, times tables. What else have we got, Becky?
We've got some on teaching for mastery and some broken down elements there, and also some specifically for tutors or TAs in the classroom as well. We've got lots of expertise in those Teach Meets, so definitely worth a listen.
And in the autumn, if you're listening to this over the summer or early in the autumn, we've got Teach Meets planned coming up on Maths in EYFS, and myself and Becky are going to be presenting one on bar modelling that will take place in November. So look out for the details on that. As I say, they are completely free and completely brilliant. So check those out if you have time. So join us again next week when my guest will be Amy Tinkler and Helen Bowen, where we'll be talking all things small schools and mixed age planning, which can be a particular difficulty, I think, in maths, having taught mixed age year groups and things in maths and worked with lots of small schools. They've got some brilliant insights into what makes a small school lovely and how you can teach maths effectively to mixed age groups.